What's good, everyone? We have another really interesting story today. News that broke a couple days ago, but I say broke a couple days ago. It's not necessarily new news. I feel like this is something that has been very much burning in the background for a number of years. It just so happens that it looks like we're starting to see a sort of elevated sort of attention around it. And it is the fact that Spotify is experiencing boycotts, expanded boycotts from a bunch of people, bunch of groups of individuals, labels, execs, all that sort of thing. Um, so let's get into it. So this news broke a couple of days ago. Spotify boycott expands. More than 30 Seattle artists sign open pledge to leave the platform. So a prominent collective of Seattle musicians, many from the jazz community, that's quite an interesting thing to note, have issued a public open letter announcing their decision to withdraw their music from Spotify. Carolyn Brotherton, a musician and former union organizer, spearheads a coalition of artists called Seattle Artists Against Spotify. Creative name. Over 30 local performers, DJs, and record label owners have signed the letter at a time of writing, voicing their concerns for what they dub is Spotify's anti-human, anti-art, and anti-listener direction. Now, this is why it's a little bit interesting. So there's a few different reasons for this boycott. I mean, when we talk about Spotify and we talk about music, typically speaking, we always sort of envision the issue being, the payouts, the issue with monetization of music and art and assets. And, it's a big problem. Let's face it, it's a huge problem. It's a problem that a lot of artists and rights holders and labels are very, very frustrated with. But it's not a new problem. Spotify was, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 2008 that it was founded or launched. And this is just potentially the latest round in an old fight about how streaming works and how payouts work. So we're going to get into it, but it's a really interesting open letter here from this Seattle collective of musicians. So the open letter criticises Spotify's business practices, especially around the use of AI-generated music and Daniel Ek's investments into AI military drone technology. So I did hear about this, and again, when it comes to questions of ethics and morals and values, a lot of artists, the creatives at heart, they have a particular set of ethics and values. You're talking especially about, not just limited to, but something like the jazz community. You would certainly expect that to be the case, right? And then if they see that this platform that they're putting their creative arts and value and life into to get their music out to the world is then sort of taking any sort of money that's generated from their works and investing it in AI and military drone technology, which, again, another topic, but a very sensitive issue right now. We're seeing massacres and all sorts all over the world, and you're just taking this tech billionaire guy and he's taking your music money and he's investing it in drone technology. It doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. It isn't good. It's not good, So it's a big issue. I wasn't too sure about exactly what Daniel Ek invested in, but maybe we could take a look at that as well. So Spotify's Daniel Ek leads near 700 million funding round for defense startup. That's insane. $700 million. Spotify CEO Daniel Ek leads the charge in a bumper round of funding for AI-based defense startup Helsing. The company says it's raised $600 million. The investment was led by Prima Materia, the venture capital firm founded by Spotify CEO Daniel Ek. So he's founded a venture capital firm, and they've raised funding for an AI-based defense startup. Insane. It operates in the UK, Germany, and France. It would use the new cash to invest into Europe's technological sovereignty What a term, man. Referring to attempts to onshore the development and production of technology such as AI. Right, and the assumption is that they're utilizing this defense technology for some pretty offensive actions, should we assume. So, founded in 2021, House Excel software that utilizes artificial intelligence technology to analyze large amounts of sensor and weapon system data from the battlefield to inform military decisions in real time. Last year, startup began manufacturing its own line of military drones. Okay, that's a whole other story, and we can maybe look at that another time. But this, so the point is that artists are not happy. They're seeing these developments as stripping art of its intrinsic value. So I wonder if we have the actual letter somewhere here. I already thought that Spotify was exceptionally predatory, shares Liana Keith, a Seattle-based flautist. Its entire model relies on desperation from artists in order to have content. Without musicians, Spotify doesn't actually have a product, and yet it continues to be one of the most profitable companies without giving actual people making their product their fair share. Right. There's a few things to break down with that statement. I think the first thing is the product mention. So without the musicians, Spotify doesn't actually have a product. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely fair. And yeah, it's true. Like, Spotify are they're licensing rights to be able to put the music on their platforms and therefore allow people to listen to it, right? I think the issue with this particular statement here is the fact that I understand where it's coming from, but I also feel like it might be coming from, and this isn't me jumping to Spotify's defense at all, but it feels like it's almost derogatory of Spotify's position in the industry. Maybe not that far, but certainly to a point where it's almost like questioning the value. Now the problem with that statement is, if you look at the world in general and all different sort of industries in general, most likely because of economic reasons, political reasons, socio-economic reasons, most successful tech companies don't actually own products or assets. They are leasing, they're licensing, they're borrowing out. Look at Uber, for instance. No cars are owned. Their whole model is the tech, the service behind the product. Behind the service, the sort of tech that they offer. That is their service. That is their platform. Airbnb, the potential of not having to own any property to make money from property. And the same could be said, I'm sure there's a bunch of other industries. Those are the two that sort of come to mind instantaneously. But then the same could be said for music. Like, Spotify don't necessarily have to own music to make money from it. So that point is a little bit debunked, I would say. And then the second point of this is, and yet it continues to be one of the most profitable companies. That's not true. That's just not true. So from my understanding, I believe that Spotify only managed to turn a profit last year. I don't think they've been a profitable company until last year. So we can look at that. So this is a blog by Media, one of the most reputable sort of data companies, data reporters in the music industry and a bunch of other industries, I believe. So it was reported Spotify finally registered its first profitable year in 2024. It has hit net profit in individual quarters before, most recently Q3 2023, but this is the first year it was profitable throughout the year. Many are viewing this as an indicator that the streaming market is now fully functioning as a sustainable sector. While that is partly true, Spotify's net profit is a reflection of its business strategy and its growing power and influence over the music business. Okay, this is really interesting. So this is the graph here. Spotify prioritized revenue growth, investment, and expansion, and now has the scale and influence to drive profitability. So this is Spotify annual's revenue growth and net profit 2018 to 2024 global. So we start in 2018 here, a really big annual revenue growth, so 28.6% annual revenue growth, but a minus 1.5% net profit, so a loss 2018. 2019, really high revenue growth, again, even bigger loss, 2.4% net profit, minus net profit. 2020, significantly smaller revenue growth. Could be probably explained by a lot of things. Was COVID 2020? I feel like COVID was 2020. I can't believe it's been 5 years, man. Even bigger loss in 2020. Obviously, a smaller revenue growth and even a minus 3.7% net profit in 2020. 2021, they fought it back. So a 22% revenue growth is just below profit making. So it's 0.04% down, back to 3.7% down, 2022. 2023, 3.4%. And then 2024, we've seen an 18% revenue growth and an 8.7% profit. So the first year that they've reported full-on profits for the year, obviously a very important and nice piece of news for investors to hear, and potentially the music industry as well, to a certain extent. But, you know, this is for the reason that Spotify have been able to do this is there's a couple of sort of strategies behind it. So here they've talked about the growth. So it took Spotify so much time and money to deliver this growth phase because it's simultaneously growing its business and making the streaming market happen. When Spotify passed the 50 million subscriber mark in Q1 of 2015, streaming was just 15% of the global recorded music business. That's insane, right? So talking about, 10 years ago now, a decade ago, streaming only accounted for 15% of global recorded music business. So there was money being made elsewhere, right? And there still is a lot. We've discussed that already. But yeah, so that's one thing. Spotify not only had to build its own brand, but had to educate an entire consumer base about the benefits of streaming. I swear Spotify used to have like a bunch of different TV ads, man. I remember watching them. They definitely had that. But yeah, so they're attributing obviously a growth strategy to this success. But then I think the maybe the more interesting thing here is the margin, the profit margin that they've been working towards. So with close to 70% of revenue allocated for music right holders, which is a huge percent of revenue, by the way. Spotify had close to 30% gross profit range from which to generate net profit. This does not leave huge room for maneuver, especially as the 70% was largely fixed. So obviously these deals that Spotify would have cut with all the labels and rights holders would have been, typically they're like 3, 4, 5 year licensing deals, just because the longer you lock in the deal, the more potential there is for revenue loss. You know, things are changing all the time in this industry. So in most businesses there is margin wiggle room, but they're basically saying that it's not really the case at Spotify. But they're supposedly found innovative ways around this. In previous years, it negotiated royalty discounts on meeting specific growth targets. It also most recently signed deals with UMG and WMG that, among various other things, codify Spotify's ability to sell bundled subscriptions. So then they're focusing on the sort of the two market aspects of this strategy, the revenue generating with regards to customers and subscribers, as opposed to the deals. So they did quickly mention the deals here, negotiating royalty discounts based on specific targets. But it's also important to remember that these labels are in bed with each other, and Spotify's in bed with the labels, right? There's shared ownership, there's shares exchanged, there's targets being met, there's kickbacks, there's royalty discounts, there's royalty payouts in advancements or minimum requirements, and there's all these sort of things that basically guard the mutual interest of these two companies as one or together, right? There's a bunch of different things. According to UMG, this included different economic treatment for music and non-music content, which means Spotify will get a discount on its music rights in respect to the non-music part of those subscriptions. UMG stated this deal drives greater monetization for artists and songwriters and pockets the win of codifying its artist-centric two-tier licensing framework. There's a few different things in this. There was also this, discovery mode was a whole sort of controversial topic in its own right, but basically it was, so we'll read through it. So finally, perhaps the most genius gross margin move by Spotify was the launch of discovery mode, where rights holders forego an extra 30% of their royalties in return for better algorithm and treatment. Yeah, I mean that that's a whole nother topic. Again, like I feel like we've discussed that previously, but essentially you're just paying Spotify more to get better service, better algorithm performance. So there's a bunch of different methods and rhymes and reasons and strategy that they've employed in order to try and become profitable, basically, as of late in the last few years. So it is an interesting time, and so but it does make me think that some of these statements here by the Seattle-based agency or Seattle-based the Seattle-based musician group are maybe a little bit inadequate or a little bit debunked. I think I understand where they're coming from, but it's a lot of anger toward them. So we'll continue on with the letter. So the track, there's just an example here of an AI generated song. Here's the full letter here. So as individual artists, we have the power to create powerful music, but our impacts on the music industry will remain small if we act alone. It is together that we can have an enormous impact. There's a little bit about there. While the economics of streaming are difficult on any platform, Spotify's harmful actions have escalated beyond just meager payouts to artists. So there we go. So they're basically saying it's more than just the payouts, right? Spotify's business model is built on the accelerated devaluation of music for artists and listeners alike. It's a debatable point. I think, they're looking at, we're constantly seeing Spotify price hikes. And it brings into, we'll read on, but it brings into question the idea of Spotify's actual position as a demon or a savior in this industry, right? So Spotify's business model is built on the accelerated devaluation of music for artists and listeners alike. Definitely not listeners, because we're paying more. Like, we're constantly paying more, right? But whatever. The efforts of the company is to, 1, demonetize the streams of music from artists with fewer than 1,000 monthly listeners. That was something. I'd have to give them that. And 2, direct listeners to playlists leaded with fake artists created by companies with contracts with Spotify. It's a big allegation, that is. And 3, platform and promote AI generated music and much more. So, yeah, AI generated music and much more are well documented. Again, debatable, but it's certainly an issue on the platform, and it's something Spotify have addressed themselves, right? So, they're not happy. It's a bit about why Seattle, the sort of artists that are involved in this as well, signed off on the letter. So yeah, there's a bunch of different things. Now, for me, it makes me sort of question Spotify's position, or at least how they're perceived in the industry. So obviously they're demonized a huge amount, and I think to a certain extent fairly enough. Like, yes, there are a lot of practices. I think putting Daniel Ek's business interests aside, which is very difficult to do, don't get me wrong, like, taking music money and investing it in warfare is like the complete opposite of what a lot of these artists actually stand for, right? So I totally get it, but taking that aside, you're sort of looking at the economics and the performance and how the industry developed over the years and the different iterations of formats that existed when it came to consuming music and how to then monetize them. I think it's clear to fairly say that the sort of physical era was the era with the most profit margin, right? The CDs and vinyls and that sort of thing sold for much bigger profit margins than the margins that we're seeing now. And that, case in point, case in point is Spotify's profitability only sort of happening in 2024. That's the case in point there. So that's one thing. The other side of the coin, outside of the sort of low payouts and the demonization of the platform, is that actually Spotify, by a lot of people, is seen as the savior of the music industry. It was dying. Napster was sort of freeing music everywhere. People would just got used to not paying for it. And Spotify sort of provided a tech solution. This is what we're talking about, the other technology companies previously, the Ubers and the Airbnbs. Spotify provided a tech solution for the issue that the music industry was facing. Spotify wasn't necessarily music industry. It was a tech company servicing the music industry. Understood? So it was like, it's very much, a tale of two sides. And it makes me think about, there was a series on Netflix a couple years ago. I think it came out in 22 or 23, called The Playlist. And it was basically all about the founding of Spotify, but not necessarily just how it was done, but also like, I think it took the perspective of various different stakeholders in the industry. So like the artist, obviously the tech company, Daniel, the investors, the labels, it's a really interesting take. But I think, and again, it covered sort of both sides of the story with regards to, are they helping us, or are they harming us? And it was very much a tale of sort of trying to convince the industry and artists that this is actually a really good thing for you. But there was a really interesting interview with the directors or the creative team behind this series, which I'm going to play a little clip from. This one here.
Complex how we told it. Is Spotify a tech business or a music business? It's a question that even Spotify sometimes, struggles to answer.
Daniel Ek's been coming on our air before the direct listing. Does he fit that mold of the classic either tech hero or tech villain or tech anti-hero, where it really does all come down to him?
Yeah, I think in many ways he does, actually. He's still in the company, and it's still his huge baby. It's kind of based on his energy and focus, on his vision. I also have to admit that you probably portray him a little harder in the series than he is alive. Most people say that he's a really sweet guy.
All the sort of business stories told creatively, Uber, for example, and Travis Kalanick, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg's had his treatment. What is it about creating a business and disrupting a technology that just is naturally narrative?
Paralav and I, in our discussions from early on.
Cool. So, yeah, like I said, it's definitely worth a watch if you haven't watched it. It's a really interesting series. I think original Swedish language, but it's it's dope, man. It's a really dope series. But back to the point. So I think looking at both sides of the argument here, it's fair to say that, the boycotting here isn't a new story, but there might be new reasons for it, and it seems that every other week there are Spotify stories coming out that just don't paint the platform in good light, and they just don't look good, right? But who's really at fault here? I think, Spotify's financials were a concern, but now that they've sort of turned to profitability, but then you're looking at the methods that they're doing that with, like, i.e. discovery mode, is that even a moral, ethical thing to do, or does it even matter? Like, is it up to them? It's their platform and tech company. Their goal is supposedly to just make money from this, and they're doing that. The deals negotiated with the labels and rights holders as well are to come into question here, because essentially we're looking at labels are supposedly not protecting, but representing the interests of the artists whose rights they hold, right? But as well as I know that that's not the case. Like these two parties are in bed with each other outside of what an artist might think or prefer or do. So, Spotify gives exposure, but the real monetization, is it even there anymore? And this is another topic, right? So it's a question of like, and it's awful because I think a lot of people might disagree, but to a certain extent now, music is becoming a marketing tool as opposed to the product itself. And I think that is because of these iterations of consumption platforms that we're seeing, streaming in general. And I think one of the biggest drivers for that is because the revenue generation just isn't there. It's not as high as it was. The margins just aren't there. That it doesn't provide as it used to, or should, or could, or would, right? But then it makes me think, like, is this like a blame game thing? Like, if we're in this era, is it not up to artists to be able to sort of, build exposure, build their sort of brand and their communities? But the real monetization sort of comes in once you have that fan base and you sell the experiences, you sell the product, you sell the community, you sell the service, not even services, but, you sell the brand. And should we stop expecting Spotify to be the financial savior for artists? It's a very controversial question and topic. I think that said, I fully understand why Spotify is being boycotted at the same time. And if anything, it might cause for a push of a new influx of platforms. And we're starting to see it already, with the direct-to-consumer stuff, with Even. Obviously, Bandcamp has been around for a long time. But we're starting to maybe see a mentality shift of artists and brands sort of moving toward that directly monetizing communities as opposed to relying on these third-party platforms. And so maybe that is where it's headed, and maybe we're headed back to a place where if you like an artist, you gotta pay for that artist, So we're seeing it happen. It's a very interesting time. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I don't think Spotify is the golden ticket, but I also don't think it's the only villain in this story. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Spotify is fully to blame here? Like, is it obviously morally and ethically incorrect for Daniel as a CEO to have outside interests which are monetizing off war? Of course, that is morally wrong. Is it an artist's concern to then sort of take their music off the platform and harm themselves in a way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about this one. I think personally it's a very interesting time. It's not necessarily looking too good for Spotify, and I think it was just really, for that money to be taken out and sort of invested in this stuff is it's really concerning. It's not nice, and yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think as well. Let me know your thoughts. Drop a like and comment in the videos, and please subscribe to the channel. We're going to be dropping more content.